I want to start by sharing a story that really set my own path kind of close to my own heart. It was a story that my teacher shared with me when I was still in college, and it just had a really deep impact in a way that studying religion as an academic subject didn't have, partly because she was living what she was saying. And it's one thing to read a book about great people. It's another thing to meet great people that have actually done what you're reading about. It makes it come alive. And I needed to see with my own eyes what is possible. So this is a story of my teacher. This is a long story short, she was a classical ballet dancer for up until her mid-30s. And a good chunk of her adult life was lived in Japan. And she came to a place where for various reasons I won't get into here, she came to find Zen practice when she was in Japan. She found a Rinzai Zen master that she practiced with as a layperson for 3 years until his health declined to such a degree that she wasn't able to practice with him anymore. And he suggested to her to go on what's called the 88 Temple Pilgrimage, which is a famous temple pilgrimage in Japan on the island of Shikoku. And it's basically around the perimeter of the island. I haven't been on it myself, but I aspire to do it one day if the causes and conditions ever manifest. But right now they're not. In any case, she did that. She did it somewhat reluctantly because she didn't really want to go on a pilgrimage. It was, for her, she went on foot, and the pilgrimage takes 6 weeks, and basically you trust the people to take care of you on the pilgrimage. You just you go with your staff and you wear a special outfit to note to outsiders that you are on this pilgrim's path. And so she started out somewhat reluctantly, but towards the end of it, she really had a major transformation take place. She would recite the Heart Sutra from morning to evening, and just as she was walking the path, the sutra that we chanted earlier, and things started to shift for her. And her teacher told her, her Rinzai teacher told her that you'll find your teacher on the path on this 88 Temple pilgrimage. And she didn't think that was going to necessarily be the case. She was kind of doubtful. But between temples 72 and 73, she saw a sign. This is in the 1970s, I'm guessing, or early 70s. She saw a sign that, like a hand sign, is pointing Zen Dojo, and it pointed in a particular direction. And she was told never to get off of the path while she's on it. But she felt secure going to a Zen temple, and so she did. The 88 Temple pilgrimage is a set of Shingon temples, so it's a little bit different from Zen Buddhism. And at that time, she didn't know the difference between Soto and Rinzai. It was all Zen. That didn't really dawn on her that there was any significant differences. And in many ways, there's not significant differences, but there are subtle differences that are important if you really practice in either tradition. So she met her to-be teacher there, and there's a lot of stories there that I'd love to share, but not at this particular point, but not in this particular talk. But at some point in their conversations that took place over a period of 3 days, she asked him if she could practice with him at that temple. And he said, no, you can't practice with me. Typical Japanese style. If you want something, you don't get it. So she said, well, he said, if you're going to you can't practice here as a lay person because people will have thoughts. I'm a man, you're a woman, and people will assume something there. However you might think about that, that's what his response was. He said, but if you wanted to ordain as a nun, then you could practice here. So then she thought about it, and she said, well, what? She asked him several more leading questions about what would require. And one of the things, a couple of things. One thing he said is, if you want to do this, if you want to do that path, and you want to practice with me, you need to be willing to in his words, he said, sit down, shut up, and live on alms for 10 years. Sit down meant do zazen, to meditate regularly, have a regular meditation practice. Shut up meant don't offer any dharma talks, especially because you're a foreigner, and that will be attractive. You'll be very attractive to the public eye, being a nun and wearing all of this foreign garb, and people will want to ask you lots of questions about the Dharma, but you won't be ripe to do that. It's too soon. You have to have some practice first, 10 years of practice. And then the third thing was to live on alms. And that meant, he said that, they have a poor temple. They don't have a lot of money. He couldn't support her alone. She would have to depend on the welfare, the beneficence of the Japanese people for her to accrue enough, basic food to eat. And so, that's a big deal if you hear something like that. I mean, I don't know who would want to do that. Especially in a society like ours where, you basically are condemning yourself to being, it appears, at least on the surface, to being a kind of beggar. So it doesn't make a lot of sense looking from the outside in, I think, in our society. But in the Japanese context, it actually could potentially work out to do that, because Buddhism has been on that soil for some around 1,500 years. And the people have even if some don't accept Buddhism, so it's not like universally accepted, but it has deep roots on that soil. And there's a long tradition of mendicant priests that wander from one temple to the other, maybe stay at the Shinto shrine or give talks here and there. There's a long history of that. And certainly the 88 Temple pilgrimage is also a testament to that tradition of wandering and depending on the beneficence of the people. And certainly she must have experienced some of that on that 88 Temple pilgrimage, where she didn't have any food and she only had the clothes that she was wearing and a staff. And the temples, each temple she would go to, she'd be expected to get there by a certain time of day, and they would feed you a meal at dinner, and then at breakfast the next day before you're on your way for the pilgrimage. And then maybe somebody would offer you something while you're on the pilgrimage. So she had probably some feeling for that sense of, it's okay, you can depend on others. It's a little bit awkward. And certainly for us in the United States, it's very awkward to even think about depending on others for food and clothing and medicine and that kind of thing. And to be honest, it's in my own life, I could say I haven't experienced that to the depth that my teacher did, I think, in living that in Japan. And I'm not sure how much other priests in the United States have experienced it to that depth either. But in any case, she said, well, I'm not sure I can do that. What am I going to do if I need money and that kind of thing? She asked him. She was concerned about being able to actually make that a viable thing. And his response, and this is where I want to go with this, is in Japanese, he said, Doshin no naka eijiki ari. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about this phrase. I'll put it up on the board here so you can see it in the Japanese and in what the possible translation could be. So Doshin is the Tao, right? You guys have maybe heard of this term, the Tao, like from the Tao Te Ching. A lot of people like that particular phrase book, right? The Tao Te Ching. So the Tao in Japanese, it's not. In Chinese, it's the Tao, but in Japanese, it's Do. So Do. This word here, Do, and then Shin. This is a really important Chinese character. It is this here. It kind of looks like a heart, Doshin, and it actually means heart or mind or heart-mind, Doshin. And then there's a particle here, no, looks like an E that's reversed, and then Naka, no Naka. Naka means the center. So Doshi no Naka e jiki ari. A is clothing. A means clothing. So priests wear what's called samu e. Samu means work, and e means clothing. Samu e. So I have a set of samu e that I wear when I work, when I'm sweeping the floor or cooking or cleaning. Samu e. So e jiki means food, and ari means to have. So one possible translation of this is that if you have a heart or mind, heart mind for the way, for the Tao, then you'll always have enough food to eat and clothing to wear. Doshin no naka e jikiari. So that was his response to her, is that if you have a heart for the way, if your heart is set, or maybe one way to think about it is if your heart or heart mind is in the center of the Tao, then you'll always have enough food to eat and clothing to wear. This Naka could also be a reference potentially to the middle way, right? So the middle being in the center, these two can go together. Doshin, the middle way. That's another homonym for the Buddha way, the middle way, the path between extremism. But also, I want to point out here too that these two characters are really super important, Doshin, and they come up in other places in Chinese literature and Japanese literature. So I think it can offer us a little bit more context for this phrase Doshin. So there's just Doshin. There's this Doshin, Doshin. So one way to think about Doshin is it's the heart mind of the way, right? So in a sense, the way, the Tao or the Do in Japanese, the way has the heart mind, right? So then the question maybe for some of us might be, well, what is the way? What is the way? And if you start to study some of the Tao Te Ching or other Chinese classics, there's a constant reference to this idea of a way. There is a path. There's a path. And that path has a heart mind to it. It's almost like the path itself is its own thing. There's an aliveness to that path. And part of the practice is to enter that path, enter that way. Here's another entrance way into understanding the way in a concrete way. In Japanese culture, you have a lot of what are called the Japanese arts. For example, there is shodo, the way of the brush, right? Or what is it? What are some kendo, the way of the sword? Judo, the way of that particular form of martial arts. The flower arrangement, right? All of these are modern practices for entering the way, for having a sense of the way. What is the way? And the way, you can't have a way without having some guidance to approach the way. So you start out with something very concrete, like a brush that you learn how to use. And in the classic culture of China, there were 6 practices that were considered really important. There's the archery, for example, was one of the 6 classic practices that you did in order to cultivate yourself. So now we're getting into the connection between doing something that that cultivates your own heart mind. Something that you're doing cultivates yourself, makes yourself a better human being, a more ethically responsible human being, not in a way that shames us, but the context here is that all of us need some degree of education. And education is not simply learning something external to yourself, but learning how to cultivate your own sense of what it is where is my place in the world, what should I be doing, and how should I act towards my fellow human beings. So through doing these arts, like flower arrangement, and learning from a teacher on how to do them, you're also simultaneously learning your own place. There's a mirroring taking place. In taking care of something else and learning some other art, like archery, you're also gaining mastery of your own heart mind, right? So this gives us a concrete way to enter into the way. It's not just some ethereal type thing. But there's another set of Chinese characters here that I think are also important. Can you guys see that? Okay. It's very similar. This is I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's pronounced in Japanese Jin Shin, or Jin Shin. Jin means a person. This is a person. And this is the same character as this one, right? Heart mind. So the ideal, or what we're, if you could say, aiming for in practice, is that the Do-shin meets the Jin-shin. These two come into alignment with each other. The heart of the way and our heart mind meet together. So we're talking about, what does this doshin mean? Well, we need to know the other half. There's our heart mind, right? There's this heart mind. And we read a poem this morning. We chanted a poem called the Hokkyo Zammai, or the Precious Mirror Samadhi. And if you remember, maybe this is again, we need to have some we need to have some understanding of the Chinese context out of which what we're chanting came from. There's a part in there that says, "Ye hit the mark at 100 paces," right? So that's a reference to this art of archery, where what we would think of as a sport in ancient China and up until the modern period, this sport, it was, and probably today still is to a certain degree, used to cultivate oneself, to master one's mind, so that you become a better person, that you connect with the precepts, that you are able to regulate your own heart mind, but also to have a harmony in your own family, and also to have some bearing on the society that you live in, that you have some influence on your society. And how did you do that? Well, you had to have some kind of practice. So archery, Yi hit the mark at 100 paces. So he was hitting the bullseye when he was shooting those arrows, right? So in other words, here's somebody who's a real master, real adept. We could expect a lot from this person. If he can shoot a bullseye from 100 paces back, well, he's somebody to pay attention to, right? But then there's this other phrase that comes in. But when arrow points meet head on, how could it be a matter of skill? When arrow points meet head on, how could it be a matter of skill? Well, these are the two arrow points, right? These two, doshin and jinshin. These are the two. We're aiming for, in a sense, just like an archer aims for the target. We're aiming for doshin. And guess what? Doshin is aiming for us. That's the little Zen Buddhist twist on this sensibility within Chinese and Japanese culture of the importance of cultivating the self. As you cultivate the self, the way enters you. How could that be a matter of skill? There's something beyond our simple efforts that happens in the process of practice that we need to recognize. In the pair poem, the Zazenkai, that's the other half of Hokkyo Zammai. Well, it's the first part of it. It was written earlier, and it was written by a different Zen master, Chinese Zen master. And Hokkyo Zammai, the one we read today, is a companion to it. And that one also has a reference to arrow points. It's very interesting. There's a part of it that says, box and lid fit, principle responds, arrow points meet. Hearing the words, understand the meaning. Don't establish standards of your own. Okay, box and lid fit. Principle responds. This is referring to this idea of the principle that the universe has certain forms that it maintains, like DNA. DNA, right? That twisty double helix bond. That's a form that has been replicated for generations in humans and animals and plants. It's the lead, it's the principle. Or you can look at a spiral. That spiral, you can find it in the spiral galaxies, you can find it in a spiral whirlpool, you can find it in a snail shell. That sense of turning and into wider and wider circles. That's another li, it's a pattern. And the chi, the energy, the potential fills that pattern. So we have life, right? Those two go together. Box and lid fit. Principle responds, arrow points meet. right? So what we're doing here is aligning that principle within us with this principle that's in the universe, right? But we have to get to that principle in us. And how do we do that? How do we get to that pattern within us? How do we cultivate it? We do it through the various ways we do it here in the Zendo. We do it by sitting Zazen, holding this form. This form is a li, it's a pattern where we sit with the hands in the cosmic mudra. Right there it is again, arrow points meeting. Our hands take this shape, we call it the cosmic mudra, and it's symbolic, but it's also embodying the entire cosmos. So we say when we sit Zazen, the whole cosmos is sitting Zazen. That's this also, that's these arrow points meeting. When we're sitting, we're not sitting like the archer who's shooting for the arrow and trying to get it. We're hitting the mark every time in Zazen. This is one of the patterns that we embody, we physically embody. Zazen is not a theoretical practice. It's an embodiment, right? And we embody it. We embody the whole universe when our hands take this particular form. We also do it with the ceremonies when we chant the sutras. There's an interaction taking place with the doshin, and we are making our own patterns known through that. You get to know yourself through ritual patterns. My teacher would sometimes say that when, for example, in the case of monks, priests, it becomes more obvious because we all look the same in terms of clothing, right? We're all wearing the same thing. And so she said that when everybody wears the same thing, I'm not meaning to say that we should all wear the same thing or shave our heads and everything. I'm not saying that. But for the context of in a monastery, in a training monastery, we all attempt to look exactly the same so that our personalities come forth. Right? You can really see the personality when everything else is kind of accounted for. So the clothing is the same, the appearance is the same, we're all doing the same thing, we're washing our faces, eating the same way. We'll get to eat the same way today. Challenging meal. When we embody those forms, then our true personality comes forward. And she would say, reverse that, and when everybody attempts to be different, you don't see the true personality coming forward. I mean, maybe some people would argue there that, especially in Western culture and American culture, everybody tries to be different, and it kind of obscures the difference. So she would say it obscures the differences within us when everybody tries to be different. Then we just see, oh, okay, they're exotic in some way, or but when everybody attempts to be the same in comportment and movement and all of that, then our diversity comes forward even more clearly. You can really start to see the diversity more. There's pluses and minuses to both of these views. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other. I'm just saying this is the worldview out of which this particular way of thinking emerges. And for us now, how can we take that as Westerners, as Americans? How do we make sense of this? How do we do it? And so something tells me that it's important when we're sitting Zazen that we know that we're not doing this by ourselves. It's not simply our own efforts that are at work here, but there's something else going on here, right? So the heart mind, our own heart mind is making that connection with the heart mind of the universe. right? So there's this, that's the aim of our practice, is to see that. And we manifest that with the cosmic mudra when we're sitting. But it's potential for any activity that we're doing. It's not just when we're sitting, not just when we're on our cushion. And furthermore, it's helpful to recognize, to acknowledge that we have anxiety and that we direct it a certain way. So going back to this original saying of my grandfather teacher, Doshin no Naka, e Jikiari. If you have a heart for the way, you'll always have enough food to eat and clothing to wear. Food and clothing, this is a major anxiety. It's like a foundational anxiety. You know, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to have the food, you got to have basic security met in order to grow and flourish in your life. And even when we have those basic needs met, still we oftentimes have anxiety, and we don't know often where it comes from. But you might want to reflect. Use this time here, we have some more time this afternoon, to reflect on where does your attention, where is anxiety in your life? One hint is that it might be connected to food and clothing, even though we have enough food and clothing, right? It's still, that is often like an underlying basic foundation. You might be anxious about money. That's also a huge anxiety for a lot of people. But if you get down to, what's behind money? Well, am I going to have enough food to eat and clothing to wear? Am I going to be able to pay my bills so I get heat? Right? That's an underlying anxiety. So money there. Recently I shared there's a verse in the Bible that I think is also very similar to this, that maybe can connect with us deeper, since we have that ethic as part of our culture, even more so. And this is one that it reminds me, it's very similar to Doshin no Naka Ijikiari. It's the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 25. I think it's chapter 6. Verse 25, Jesus says, "Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or drink, or the clothing that you will wear." Look at the birds. Doesn't your Heavenly Father, I'm just paraphrasing, doesn't your Heavenly Father take care of them? They don't have to think about so much tomorrow. Even the lilies of the field, they have more splendor than the garments that King Solomon wore. Aren't you more precious than the birds? Aren't you more precious than the flowers? Your Heavenly Father will take care of you. We have enough anxiety for today. In other words, take care of today. Don't worry about tomorrow. And in the Christian tradition, Jesus makes this a commandment. He says, "Do not be anxious." That's very hard for most people. I would say for everybody, to actually follow through on that. And when I chaplain, I often use that verse when I go around to the hospital beds and talk with people, because I'm working predominantly with Christians, and I want to offer verses that, might speak with people and that also speak to me. And I say, this is really hard for us. And I had this one person say to me, "You know what, I'm not anxious about myself so much. I'm anxious about my family." But that doesn't, that's true. We do. We might not have any anxiety about ourselves too. Our anxiety might be directed at our family. But if I were to dig deeper there, I bet I would find a person who's very controlling. I want my family members to do a certain thing and be a certain way. And so there's that anxiety. Jesus says, it won't add 1 hour to your life. Anxiety will not add 1 hour to your life. Yet, here we are, anxious beings, anxious human beings. So the question I think would be helpful to reflect on for us at this time during this retreat is, where do I place my anxiety in? What do I place my anxiety in? What am I particularly worried about? Not to dwell on that, but just to be able to recognize that we have anxiety and we do place it on something. Doesn't matter where you place it on. Doesn't matter what you think you're anxious about. Probably there's an underlying thing of food or clothing and having enough in some form. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Just the fact that we have some anxiety and we want to acknowledge it as a means of releasing it. That's the point, is a means to release it. And redirect our attention, not towards the whatever creates our anxiety, but is our heart, mind, centered in the way, the Tao? If it's centered in the Tao, you'll always have enough food and clothing. So this is pointing to the importance of trusting the way, the Tao, that there's a living way. And if we give ourselves over to it, right, through the practice of Zazen and other practices, those are concrete ways to enter into the way. But it could also be entering into the way through your workplace. It could be entering into the way through your family. All of this is part of the bigger way. Right? So entering into that's where you can direct your practice, right? It starts with the self sitting on the cushion. We start there, and we start to recognize, here's the way, right? Sitting here, I have my hands in the Cosmo Mudra. I'm acknowledging, I'm entering into this. The whole universe and I are one. That's what we're doing when we're sitting. The whole universe and I are one. We don't get there, we are there. That's what Zazen is acknowledgement of. And so what we're doing, though, is we don't believe it, right? We don't believe that's the case. So we want to just confirm that, or we want to just notice it or recognize it, because there's something very nourishing about sitting in that way. Even if you don't believe it right now, even if you can't see it right now, just contemplate it, reflect on it. Wow, myself and the whole universe are one. Wow, okay. It's going to take me some time I've been reflecting on that for the past 20 years. It's just going to take time to really let that absorb into you. And there's something really nourishing to the heart mind about that. We're not alone. And then we take that off of the cushion into our families, right? With our partners, if we have children, with our children. That's really hard to do. We can't even do it with ourselves. How are we going to do it with our partners, with our family? So just start with the self. Just start with the self, and maybe consider thinking about it sometimes when you're with your family. How do I do this with my family? How do we harmonize with the family? Maybe you can think about it, start to think about, like, your job is so important. I don't mean to pump up our egos on this, but if you can see that what you're doing, even if you don't like it, you are a manifestation of the entire way, or of the entire universe in your work. And this is important work to be doing right now. If you don't do your work, the whole universe falls apart. So do it fully. Do whatever it is that you do fully. And if you don't like it, well, maybe find something that you really want to do. Because again, if you have a heart for the way, you'll always have enough food to eat and clothing to wear. If you have a heart for, so you don't have to, again, my teacher was talking about changing her occupation. She was a classical ballet dancer that up until that point, she was able to get by on teaching English to Japanese businessmen. And she was switching occupations. I don't know if I can do it, right? She wasn't fully, she was satisfied for a while in that job, teaching English. But then she was finding it not satisfying. And that's the case for a lot of us. We do a job and we lose interest in it, or there's something we see, there's something I'm missing here. And this statement, Doshin no Naga, Eiji Kiyari, is encouraging us not to get stuck in worrying about food and clothing. But if you have a heart for the way, what is that way for each one of us? Each one of us is going to be different. I mean, it could be, I'm going to be a priest. And you got to worry about food and clothing. Okay, but if you have a heart for the way, you don't worry about that. Maybe you want to be an artist in some way, or you want to be a professional cook or an athlete or something. Whatever it is, what is that? Is how do we manifest our heart? But not just our heart, meeting with the universe, right? 2 arrow points meeting. That's what we want to get at. What is the universe? This is two ways. It's a two-way street. It's us, but it's also the universe. You know? And that's where ego does come in. That's where ego blocks us, right? Here. I thought I wanted this, but the universe is saying, no. This is what I want you to be doing. Oh, okay. So our job then is, okay, let's refine this heart mind. And that's, again, this is also what we're doing when we're sitting in Zazen, and this day here, as we're reflecting, we're allowing that to the refining of our own energy, that chi, that life force, through the pattern, through the li of Zazen. The chi, the energy, the life force gets refined through the process of sitting. So we might not notice it happening, but my teacher would say it's like the if you were to scoop up water from the Susquehanna River, that was in central Pennsylvania where we live, or I guess here would be the Missouri River. If you just scoop up some water at random, what would you have? The turbidity and stuff swirling around there would be murky water. But what happens after an hour? You sit that glass down and don't move. Don't let it move. All that sediment goes to the bottom, and then you have clear water on the top. And that's kind of what we're doing when we're doing Zazen. We're letting that turbidity of our mind, it's just going to swirl around. That's what the mind does. That's okay. Don't get bothered by that. And just let it settle. It'll settle by itself when you sit still. It can't but not. So that's what we're doing when we're sitting Zazen. We're refining the chi. All right. So point our heart mind to the way and don't worry about your food and clothing. Thank you.